After defeating Archelaus at Carnina, Sulla headed to Thessaly to meet Lucius Valerius Flaccus, who had arrived from Italy. However, Sulla was unaware that Flaccus had been sent to attack him, instead of uniting forces during his journey. Selma received news of the arrival of general reinforcements at Chalcis under Laevis, including a large fleet and 80,000 skilled and disciplined soldiers. They were eager to reconquer Greece and avenge their losses at Carnina. Behind Laevis, Sulla and Archelaus joined forces, mustering a combined army of approximately 90,000 men and capturing Paeoea. The two generals decided to position themselves in the communist camp east of Carnina. The communists provided an ideal battlefield for their well-equipped army, as their vast plains extended along the Melas River. This terrain enhanced the superiority of their cavalry, which numbered 10,000, but they were careful to avoid the marshy areas on its outskirts. However, Archelaus took the necessary precautions by establishing a well-fortified camp behind his forces in anticipation of any adverse developments. The subsequent battle was characterized by greater confusion than the more organized engagement at Chaeronea. This complexity is evident in the descriptions provided by ancient sources. While these accounts are not entirely contradictory, they highlight different aspects of the battle, making it difficult to fully understand. However, all accounts agree on one central point. Archelaus took a strategic step to impede the advance of Archelaus's cavalry by digging wide ditches, each 10 feet wide. The purpose of these ditches was to make certain parts of the camp impassable to cavalry, effectively neutralizing the impact of Archelaus's cavalry. Archelaus was determined not to give up his valuable advantage over the enemy forces without a fight. As a result, his cavalry rushed out of the camp pool, surprising the Romans and preventing them from forming a proper defensive formation. The rapid advance of the Pandava cavalry, numbering in the thousands, was witnessed. The troops succumbed to panic and began retreating to the safety of their camp. Unfortunately, many reached the camp before the enemy cavalry could catch up with them. It seemed almost impossible. This crucial moment nearly ended the battle. Sulla emerged as the sole saviour of the situation through his individual efforts. Holding himself to the earthworks, he shouted fiercely to his struggling soldiers. His words echoed with determination as he shouted, "Orchomenus, remember the name! I am prepared to fight and die here. When asked where to leave your commander, let your answer be Orchomenus." This declaration left the soldiers feeling embarrassed and encouraged them to regain their composure. Feeling remorseful, Sulla's officers rallied around him, and with their support, the Roman legion rallied its ranks. They found the resolve to hold on. Their resolve held firm long enough for 2 unengaged legions to arrive to assist them. Apotec's forces, under the command of Diogenes, son of Archelaus, fought with ferocious force. Diogenes was likely killed at this point. However, the cavalry struggled in an orderly battle against the infantry, especially as additional Roman reinforcements continually joined the fray. Eventually, the cavalry was forced to retreat, pursued by the Romans, and advanced toward the panicked archers who were trying to help them. The panicked archers found themselves under immense pressure from the close combat initiated by the Romans. This pressure was so intense that the archers were unable even to draw their bows and resorted to using a handful of arrows as makeshift swords. They bravely repelled the Roman soldiers, safe within his camp. Archelaus noted Saladin's speed building new earthworks. In response, Archelaus again led his troops, this time adopting a more organized and structured battle formation. The details of this formation were likely derived from Soloson's memoirs, transmitted by Frontinus, who documented them in his tactical plans. The front line of archers consisted of flanking chariots, which eventually achieved a clear lead against the Roman formations that followed the chariots. The Macedonian phalanx was prepared to exploit the confusion that the chariots would sow among the Roman ranks positioned behind the sentries. These were the escaped Italian slaves who had put up a resilient resistance at Chaeronea. These former slaves were armed and equipped in the same way as the Roman auxiliary forces. Cavalry positioned on either flank were concentrated for attack. However, the earthworks hindered the cavalry's effectiveness. Sulla was able to build these earthworks extending to the furthest points of the flanks. These culminated in earthworks and entrenchments, which hindered the maneuverability and effectiveness of Archelaus's cavalry. Sulla's army was arranged in 3 distinct lines, with carefully calculated gaps between the soldiers, allowing for the movement of light infantry or even cavalry across the lines when necessary. Sulla also organized his phalanxes differently from the counter-phalanxes. The counter-phalanx formed a denser front, while the rear phalanxes had more space behind them. This was the purpose of this unique formation. This became apparent as the flanking chariots charged toward the Roman formations. As the flanking chariots approached the Roman lines, the front legion executed a rapid flanking and rearward movement. This maneuver revealed a dense arrangement of stakes driven into the ground at angles calculated to maximize the force of the impalement. As the first wave of chariots advanced steadily toward their inevitable fate, the Roman javelins advanced swiftly between their ranks, firing opportunistic shots at any chariots that managed to swerve, avoiding the dangers of those attempting to veer to safety. This sense of security, however, was short-lived, as the Macedonian phalanx advanced rapidly, exploiting the confusion created by the surrounding chariots. The collision between the chariots and the phalanx caused heavy damage to both sides, ensuring a mutual loss. However, this engagement highlighted the potential for chaos when confronting poorly equipped infantry formations. Sulla strongly encouraged his troops to advance, leaving Archelaus with heavy losses. Archelaus hoped that while his phalanx regrouped, his cavalry could confront the Romans, who were preparing to confront the cavalry in this critical situation. Sulla's extensive military experience was evident. He anticipated this maneuver and devised a countermeasure by sending his cavalry through gaps in the Roman ranks that he had cleared of spears, despite Sulla's overwhelming numerical superiority. Sulla's cavalry played a decisive role, even with a brief delay. Their goal was to temporarily disrupt the massive Buddhist cavalry attack. This temporary delay proved valuable despite the difficulties. Sulla's infantry continued their steady advance, and while the Pandava cavalry engaged Sulla's cavalry, the Roman infantry attacked. They encountered the cavalry engaged in fierce fighting, with Sulla's cavalry cutting through the Pandava cavalry. The Roman legion advanced to attack, contrary to what Archelaus had hoped. The legion was unable to reposition and reorganize as he had hoped. However, Archelaus learned from his previous mistakes and ensured the legion had a clear and safe retreat route back to their camp. As a result, his infantry losses were relatively limited, totaling around 5,000 men throughout the various phases of the battle. By this time, cavalry on both sides had suffered heavy losses, with the Buddha's cavalry taking particularly heavy blows. Their numbers had been reduced by about 10,000 cavalry as a result of the events of that day, and Sulla concluded that despite the heavy losses inflicted on Archelaus's army, the enemy still retained a numerical superiority over his forces. Sulla realized that if Archelaus's forces were allowed to flee, the Bondi commander might adopt a strategy of attrition similar to that of Fabius Maximus, an outcome that would undermine Sulla's victory. To prevent this, Sulla kept a large portion of his forces on alert. At dawn, Sulla stayed up all night and wasted no time in building additional earthworks, less than 600 feet from the Bondi camp on the other side. Archelaus rallied his forces, asserting their numerical superiority over an enemy that had bravely surrounded them. The Bondians responded with unwavering resolve, as was their custom in battle, breaching their camp's defences and simultaneously repelling the fierce Roman attack. Sulla launched his own attack, setting the stage for another violent and chaotic confrontation. This pitted Sullus's legions, known for their discipline and adaptability, against a larger Bondian force, driven by overwhelming numbers and an unyielding spirit. Eventually the Romans breached part of the Bondian fortifications, but encountered another inner wall composed of resilient Bondian soldiers standing firm side by side. The Roman forces hesitated, waiting for an opportunity to exploit the situation at this critical moment. A young officer named Basilus pounced on an African soldier opposite him, killing him. This bold act served as the catalyst for the Romans to rush into the gap and begin a devastating massacre, their retreat hampered by swamps. The remnants of Archelaus's army that left the camp found no escape, and the waters gradually turned crimson with blood, even centuries later. Plutarch mentioned artifacts, such as the shields of Boaz. Barbarian swords were constantly being dug out of the mud after the Battle of Sulla. Sulla's forces were not inclined to take prisoners, and the brutality of the engagement left little room for boasting about the heavy Roman losses. Moreover, given their status as a rogue army, Solon's forces had little need for prisoners. This was another example of Bondicus's army suffering heavy losses at the hands of Roman swords. Archelaus managed to escape defeat and withdrew from the battlefield. He returned to Oppia in a small boat. He no doubt anticipated Mithridates' reaction upon receiving news of this latest fiasco. When this news reached the Methodians, he realized that the war was effectively over and ordered Archelaus to seek peace terms. Saladin and Archelaus quickly agreed to the terms, and a close friendship later developed between them. Initially, Mithridates rejected some of the terms, but his position in Asia Minor began to deteriorate. Flaccus's army, then under Fimbria's control, achieved a victory. The son of Datis was at Melitopolis, while a fleet under Lucius Licinius Lucullus defeated the Pontic fleet at Tanitus. Mithridates then agreed to a personal meeting with Sulla, accepting all the original foreign terms.